Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The Israeli aggression against the innocent people in Gaza, in the besieged Gaza Strip, continues unabated, and it's been over 3 months that this particular brutality has been unleashed by the Israeli regime, with the Gaza's health ministry saying so far over 23,000 innocent Gazans have lost their lives, mostly women and children, and over 58,000 people have been injured. According to the UN estimates, around 60% of the Gaza's infrastructure has been brought down to rubble. It has been completely destroyed. What we have been seeing, despite the international community's repeated calls of an immediate ceasefire and the access of adequate humanitarian aids, access to the Gaza people in Gaza, there hasn't been any sort of a halt on the part of Israeli regime. Now, when we talk about the UN Special Envoy on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, and the UN Special Envoy on the right to adequate housing, Balakrishnan Rajgopal, they have criticized the international criminal courts for being slow in prosecuting those responsible for the war crimes by Israel in Gaza. On the other hand, we have seen the repeated sort of statements coming from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has addressed his war cabinet on Sunday and once again has hinted of continuing his military action in Gaza. At the same time, we have seen thousands of protesters coming into the streets of Tel Aviv, and they have demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Netanyahu, the dissolution of the parliament, and the early elections. Also, amid all this that is happening in the Gaza Strip and the kind of statements coming from the top leadership of Israel, we've seen the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on his tour to Middle East. He's been to a couple of states, including Jordan, Turkey, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and is also expected to meet other regional leaders in order to discuss this particular prevalent situation as far as this Gaza conflict is concerned. Now, Secretary Blinken had said we have an intense focus on preventing this conflict from spreading, and a big part of the conversations we will be having over the coming days with all of our allies and the partners is looking at the steps they can take. Before the departure of this particular delegation led by Secretary Blinken, Matthew Miller, the spokesperson of the State Department, had said, we don't expect every conversation on this trip to be easy. Also, in today's program, we are going to take up for discussion the stats which come forth in a Gallup survey regarding the popularity of Netanyahu in the US and also the US role in this particular conflict. To discuss all these aspects, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Jauhar Saleem, his former Foreign Secretary. Mr. Saleem, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Munawar Ali Mahar, expert in international relations. Mr. Mahar, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Saleem. Now, looking at this particular visit by Secretary Blinken, we have seen in the recent past, since 7th of October, there have been many of the visits by some of the very top officials from the Biden administration towards the Middle East. Now, this is not the first of Secretary Blinken's visit also to the Middle East. Now, this time around, what is the significance of this particular visit? What are the stakes particularly associated with this particular visit as we speak?
Thank you. As you rightly pointed out, this is his 5th visit following the 7th October crisis, this conflict, which already has been there for 3 months, and there are no signs of it abating anytime soon. Before that, there are other senior US officials who also paid visits to the region. Prominent amongst them were Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary, before he got hospitalized. And also another important envoy, which was Amos Hochstein, very close to the president. He also visited. He's seen as an expert on the region. Now, what we see is that these visits take place at critical junctures. Presently, what we see is another critical juncture, because now Israeli military with their full might, has really with a shock and awe type of an operation, which has led to a massacre of Palestinians. About 23,000 have been killed, unfortunately, mostly civilians, in fact, predominantly civilians, women, children. And then we had so many stories of how sort of children are being maimed every day. There are dozens of children. Despite that, the success has been rather limited. The Israelis claimed that they have so far, in their words, eliminated 8,000 Hamas fighters. But the analysts would put the Hamas numbers before this conflict started at about 30,000, which was distributed in 5 brigades and then 24 battalions and so on and so forth. And the thing is that if the soldiers get killed in any conflict, the numbers can be replenished. It takes time, but of course the numbers can be replenished. The Israelis also claim that they have dented the tunnel infrastructure that the Hamas had set up there, and which also holds their command and control centers. The leadership is based there, and they also claim that the hostages, and there are still about over 100 hostages, they also are being kept there. On the other hand, what we've seen is, because of what has been going there, and this is probably the most brutal episode of a state fighting a group, an asymmetric warfare, so to speak, where the civilian casualties have been astronomical. And the world is watching. And every day that passes, and every day that the numbers of casualties increase, there's increased pressure on the US and its allies. And not just from the Muslim world, not just from the other countries, but even within that group, the allies of the US, they are pressurizing US because they said that we laid our trust in you, that you will be able to contain the Israelis and ensure that the war is prosecuted, or the conflict is prosecuted from the Israeli side in a way that there are minimum civilian casualties, and there's some modicum of international laws being kept in view, if not implemented. That has not happened. But having said that, what the Americans have accomplished so far is, first of all, very importantly, they have been able to contain the conflict in terms of it not spreading, because this could have become a regional conflict. There are the powers within the region and outside region, such as Iran. And Iran has a great deal of influence within the region as well through certain organizations. So that has not happened. The Americans have been able to contain that. Secondly, the Israelis, because Netanyahu is known for his reckless style, and this is the battle of his life in terms of political survival. Just before this whole tragedy started, he was in dire straits politically within the country. And after that, because people saw him as having been incapable of, because this is his whole political legacy had been built on this sort of, providing strong leadership and providing security to the Israelis. And that was dented. And because of that, it was like, with full force, he wanted to literally sort of, terrorize the Palestinians to the extent where his credibility could have been rebuilt in some way. Well, what he has done after all this, it has not happened so far. In fact, cracks are visible within Israel. Now, the opposition parties within Israel, Benny Gantz, who probably could be elected if the elections were to be held today. He's a former Israeli army general. The other opposition leaders are basically they are Zionist, religious fundamentalist elements. What they want is even more extreme than what Netanyahu has been calling for.
If you kindly hold your thought over here, we'll resume and I'll try to understand what you have to speak about this, what basically is going on internally within Israel. So as far as your understanding of the accomplishment, as far as Israeli Prime Minister's policy regarding this particular military operation is concerned, you're of the view that it had been limited. And there was an accomplishment on the part of the US when it comes to containing this particular conflict, not letting it spread into the wider region. Let me take Mr. Mahar's view on this particular thing. What's your understanding when it comes to this particular military operation on the part of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? How successful do you think it been? Do you think was it able to achieve all the objectives it had already set? And especially given the fact there's been so much damage and destruction which has been highlighted, repeatedly talked about by the international community, the UN and its agencies also.
Jawad, thank you for having me in your show. Before coming to the point, let me add to the upcoming visit. This upcoming visit is going to achieve nothing. It is a cosmetic measure to look busy and do nothing, because we need to understand that America is the part of problem. America is not solution in this crisis. Israel is fighting this war with the military support of America. Because action speaks louder than words. Biden has requested additional $14 billion to assist Israel, to help Israel achieve Iron Beam, and to help Israel get new, enhance its military capabilities. So far, now this visit is coming at a time when Israel, with the help, by dropping 29,000 bombs on Gaza, they have killed over 20,000 people, including 8,000 children and over 4,000 women, 700 journalists, and over 7,000 UN workers. Now this visit is coming at a time, and what is the agenda of this visit? Just to push Israel to allow the humanitarian aid. Now the real agenda of this visit should be to end this war. But as I told you that Israel fights, America is aiding and abetting this war, rather than helping to end this war. This is not the real agenda. Real agenda should have been to force Israel to end this war at a time when 20,000 people have been, 1% population of Gazans has been wiped out, killed by the Israel. Now your agenda is too little and too late. As for your the question,
right, I'll come to that particular question. Now regarding this particular visit, we've seen a number of high-ranking officials from the US coming and visiting the Middle East, and also talking to the Israeli top leadership. Now by looking at these statements which come forth by Secretary Blinken, he says that too many Palestinian civilians are suffering from insufficient access to food, to water, to medicine, to other essential supplies. This he said in a conference in Qatar. Now he continues on to say that we continue to raise with Israel the need to do everything possible to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and I will do so again when I'm there later this week. I'll also raise the imperative of doing more to prevent civilian casualties. Far too many innocent Palestinians have already been killed. So by looking at this statement, how the thing is very much proven that you have already said in your take that the major agenda of it is to just give that access to humanitarian aid. When it comes to the concern regarding the number or the scale of the civilian casualties that have taken place, what's your understanding? What's the intention behind this one?
These statements are diplomatic, these are cosmetic, these are artificial. Because as I told you, action speaks louder than words. On the one hand, you are asking Israel to not to kill civilians, and on the other hand, you are providing them, you are going to provide them 14 billion additional military aid and assistance to Israel to kill more Palestinians. So where does these statements stand? These concerns, as I told you, these are hollow concerns. You need to force it, because you know Israel is fighting this war with the support of America. Historically, America is a part of problem in this conflict. Since 51, let me put this into proper perspective. Since 51, America has provided over 150 billion US dollars to Israel. 15% of Israel's military defense budget, it comes from America. 18% of Israeli equipments and imports, military imports, they come from America. If you want to really do something for the Palestinians, Americans, I'm talking of Americans, then you need to cut off this oxygen to Israel. You are providing ventilators to Israel. Cannot fight a war without American US military support and aid and assistance. So on one side, these are the facts and figures that are speaking louder than the American
I'll come to you back to take your detailed view regarding as to what were the statements by President Joe Biden also regarding warning Israel of losing the international support if it continues with its indiscriminate bombardment on the civilians. For now, we are joined by another participant on the phone line, Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Afridi, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, what do you think are the major stakes? We've seen the high-ranking US officials back and forth coming and visiting Middle East as far as the Gaza situation is concerned. This time around, this is the 5th visit by Secretary Blinken himself. Do you expect any sort of substantial outcomes transpiring out of this particular visit, perhaps making or telling Israel to do certain specific things?
Well, actually, it's rightly said that whenever diplomacy fails, and whenever there is failure of diplomacy, then war begins. So this is exactly the situation, what is going on in Gaza, what is going on with the aggression of Israeli forces on the innocent Palestinians. So I say and I believe that this war or this escalation would not have been happened if this diplomatic effort by the United States or by even other regional major powers, they were there, but unfortunately it was not there. That's why this escalation is still continued, and a lot of people, innocent people, they became the victims of this war, and Israeli forces, they became they have done the war crime. But this visit, or this is the continuation, or the another round of the U.S. official or Secretary of State Blinken in this regard, we can hope for a pause in this war. And even if it's not enough, it can be said that it can be appreciated in this regard that, okay, something can be done, but why not take such steps had to be taken before at the start in October last year? Why not? Why the U.S. officials, they were not condemning the Israeli aggression this time? Why they were not stopping? Why they were not, making hindrance in the way of the Israeli aggression? And now, if the entire world is watching the situation, there is condemnation from every corner and every sector of the world. Now the U.S. officials, they are coming and they are making these rounds to stop this war. But even now, if it happens, so it can be appreciated. But we have and they have to look for a permanent solution. And permanent solution, there are some terms and conditions. I mean, this two-state solution, that is the way. The Palestinians, they must give their own state and their due recognition, international diplomatic recognition, and even as a member state, sovereign state status in the United Nations organization. Another issue, that is the return of the Palestinian refugees who are living in different countries, in Egypt and Lebanon and in European countries and even in America. So they must be returned. And another thing, all those lands who are occupied by force or by some other means, and recent settlements by the Jews on the Palestinian lands, those must be stopped, and all those lands who belong to the innocent Palestinians, those must be given. I think that is the task, and that is the permanent solution. If it doesn't happen, so in future, that kind of...
Your point is well taken. Dr. Afridi, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here as you speak, that these steps are a welcoming step. Dr. Meher, Mr. Meher was of the view earlier that these steps are more of cosmetic, and U.S. being the problem of the conflict itself. Now, when we talk about the statements which been coming from the top leadership of the U.S., what's your understanding when we talk about the statement that came from President Biden also warning Israel of losing the international support if it continues with its indiscriminate bombardment in Gaza? Now, if you are of the view that these are welcoming steps, so why has the US been unable to influence the the Israeli authorities so far, despite back-to-back visits by the high-ranking officials, to lessen the kind of aggression or the brutalities it has unleashed on the Gazans?
Obviously, I have stated that even these efforts, it was the need of the hour at the start in October last year, why the U.S. officials, they were failed, or even there were statements from the U.S. administration that they were in support of the Israeli forces, and they were saying that Israel is doing it in the self-defense. But what kind of self-defense if there is no discrimination among the old people, among the hospitals, ambulances, and even the food supply that was stopped? So I have already stated that the American administration, it was in a way they were supporting the Israeli aggression. But now, if they are really interested for this diplomacy, for these rounds, for these visits, but they have to look for a permanent solution, then actually something fruitful that can be come out from these efforts.
Your point is well taken. Please stay with us. I'll come back to you regarding certain other aspects. Very quickly, Mr. Mahar. Now, when you say these are the cosmetic steps, and US being the problem with this particular thing itself now, and also the actions speak louder than words, and then there had been a second time that the Biden administration actually bypassed its own Congress for that weapons sales to Israel. Now, but looking at that particular statement, warning Israel of losing the international support, what does that particular depict also? And especially given the fact that there was an overwhelming vote in favor of the ceasefire at the UNGA.
Actually, this shift in US stance towards Israel is not sincere, is not wholehearted. It is coming after the massive protest across the US, across the world, in European capitals that have forced America to tone down its support to Israel. And in the same breath, America unconditionally supports Israel's right to defend. Defend against whom? Defenseless people. Gaza is the largest living hell. It used to be jail, now it is a living hell on this planet. Israel has killed 20,000 innocent Palestinians. Right to defend against the innocent people, against the kids. You are sowing the seeds of a new conflict, internal conflict in the Middle East by making those kids orphan. You are killing their parents. Now you are creating a new breed of freedom fighters in Palestine, and you are trying to make this conflict spill over into the region. Actually, basically, the real aim of this visit is also to prevent the spillover effect of this war into the region, because they fear that Hezbollah might get involved into this conflict. So this visit seeks to prevent this, prevent the spread of this conflict, and to push Israel for the humanitarian.
Do you think the US would be able to successfully do that? Because after the back and forth visits by the high-ranking officials by the US, we haven't seen any sort of these hostilities or aggression or the brutality on the part of the Israeli authorities coming to any sort of a halt. And they'd been pursuing on that particular line whatever they deemed was in their own interest, rather than listening to what the US also was saying or warning them.
Actually, I think these visits, these statements are just, Johanna, playing to the domestic gallery back in US and in the Western, in the international community, liberal world. These are going to achieve nothing. As I told you, that you are providing them, requested the $14 billion in military aid and assistance to acquire.
So that is exactly the point, how the aim of this visit could be preventing this
conflict
to go into a wider region.
It's going to end up in the failure, as the previous visits achieved nothing. Because you look at the outcome. What is the outcome of previous four visits?
Right. Let me take Mr. Saleem's view on this. Do you have an understanding? Do you agree with what Mr. Mahar has just said? On one side, the U.S. continues to push Israel with all those arms sales towards Israel, and by resorting to such type of visits, which he deems are more of cosmetic, this particular conflict has all that capacity of going into a wider region. Your understanding regarding that?
I think we have to see these visits and the diplomacy that is being undertaken in a more nuanced manner. We all know what is the US policy on Israel. There's no ambiguity on that. it's very clear that they have always supported Israel within the UN, outside the UN, and they'll continue to do that because of their national dynamics and because of their international relations.
So do they get the equal proportion of influence on Israelis also? If they've been backing continuously Israel for over the years and their home policy also dictates them to do so, so do they get the reciprocal sort of a say in influencing what Israeli authorities should be or ought to be doing?
I think there are two dimensions to that. The first is that the Jewish influence in the US politics. And that has been there for a long, long time, and it's still there. Because of that influence, no US president, no US political party can take a stance anytime which is clearly against Israeli interests. I'm not saying against the interest of any particular party in Israel, but against the Israeli interest. See, one is that. The other dimension is that Israel, and many analysts see Israel as a Western outpost in many ways in the Middle East, which also serves many policy objectives, many strategic interests. And because of that, it is in their interest to keep Israel strong, to ensure its security, to ensure not just its security, but its predominance, military predominance in the region. And that is going to continue. Now, these visits that have been undertaken, like I said, their purpose is not really to, because it was very clear, and the US has made so many statements on that. The purpose was never to just stop the conflict in the tracks, because they knew what the Israelis wanted to do, and it had US tacit support. The Israelis, what do they want to do? Basically, they first said, we want to eliminate Hamas. Then they toned it down a bit. They said, we want to ensure that Hamas is never there in any powerful role or any sort of governance roles or has any influence there. We want to effectively destroy Hamas's political capital and destroy its organization capacity and its military capacity as well. So these were the objectives. How far they have achieved it, we've already discussed that. But what these visits do is, these visits are like basically like you're in a way you're just tampering. It's like navigating just a bit here, just a bit there, just to ensure that the Israelis, if in some ways they've gone too overboard, for instance, this just to temper that down a bit, and then also to take care of the international sort of the European and the Muslim and other sort of pressure. And not just to meet Israelis, but to meet all the regional leaders. And more importantly even, to ensure that there's no spillover of this conflict, because it doesn't become a wider conflict. Deep down, the Americans want what the policy was before this conflict started, which was to gradually have Israel's relations with the neighboring countries normalize. And there was quite a degree of success. And if anybody thinks that part is over, no, I don't think so. Once this conflict is over and certain time has elapsed, I think that thing will be restarted as well. But also what would be restarted is the overall sort of ambit of some sort of a peace process, sort of between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because what this conflict has also done is that it has sparked this whole debate once again as to this cannot go on. So I think, but before that, Americans will continue to support Israel, in terms of the military assistance, in terms of providing them the international sort of, whatever cover, if you could call that, support within the United Nations, all types of support that would be there. But at the same time, they would be calling upon Israel for restraint, because it is not in American interest that there's a massacre, continued massacre there. I'm sure that the Americans definitely want Israel. What do they want Israelis to do? They want them to contain this military offensive in a way that it becomes a low intensity, more targeted operation, rather than sort
which
of
Israelis have been unable to do so far.
Yeah.
despite the repeated US calls regarding that, reducing the intensity of this particular and focusing with the targeted, or
Operation.
accuracy and precision, right?
Yeah.
So Israel has been unable to do so.
No, they haven't been, no, I wouldn't say unable. I would say so far they haven't been wanting to do. Yeah.
Yeah, deliberately they've ignored this. So does it lead us to conclude that no matter whatever the US is urging or warning, or whatever the US wants in this particular region, it falls on the deaf ears of the Israeli authorities in place at this
I
moment?
wouldn't say that, because you see, we have to, what are the voices in Israel? First of all, we have to listen to those voices. Netanyahu right now is basically a minority voice there, in terms of the public support and everything. The parties which actually enjoy public support right now, what are they calling for? They are calling for a resettlement, or basically, basically expulsion of, Palestinians from Gaza. And basically just sending them to other countries. That's what they're asking for. And that is the climate within Israel, that, just send them away. So basically, and Americans have clearly come out of, come out against that. Because, so there are certain limits within which they want to keep the debate, So I think there is certain, there's certain influence that the Americans do have in Israel. And that helps in some ways, it hasn't really helped in sort of stopping this conflict. It hasn't, but it has helped in sort of, like this, not spilling over, but it has also helped, in terms of no drastic measures such as, because a military might could just expel everybody outside, and perhaps then it could have been a very different scenario. So the American, I think, diplomacy is important. We can't really just sort of,
right. Let me take Dr. Manzoor Afridi's view on this also. Dr. Afridi, now, Mr. Saleem is of the view that there has been an accomplishment on the part of the US administration also of having kept this particular conflict contained and not letting that go into a wider conflict in the region. Now, given the fact that there have been repeated statements coming from Benjamin Netanyahu also, now he has also addressed his war cabinet saying that victory will only be achieved if we complete our goal and when we will bring back the security to the people of the North and South at once. Now, also we had seen the kind of statement by the spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces also that this particular conflict is likely to continue throughout the year 2024. Now, by looking at these statements coming from the IDF as well as the Prime Minister himself, and with the kind of interest the US has got in this particular region, they don't, of course, want this particular conflict to go into the wider region. Do you think the US would for a long time be able to keep this particular conflict contained, given the fact that the Israelis want to prolong this, especially throughout the year 2024?
Well, we have already seen the experiments made by the United States, the diplomatic efforts, starting from the Oslo Agreement and then the Sharm el-Sheikh, the Camp David Accord, and so many others, the diplomatic initiatives taken by the United States. But all of them, they were almost failed by not having to stop this tension between Israel and Palestine, and also not to have a permanent solution for this conflict. So I think it depends on sincerity. If really United States is sincere in its efforts, then of course it's very much possible. But what we have seen from all the politics of international relations, which is based on the interest, and what we have observed and what we have learned from the diplomatic relations between the United States and Israel, so the chances are very much bleak, and those chances for a permanent solution, stability or peace in the region, especially in Palestine, that is very much blurred. The situation, the picture, the futuristic scenario is blurred. So it depends on the sincerity. But on the other hand, if we see the statements issued from the Benjamin Netanyahu or the Foreign Office of Israel or the Defense Secretariat of Israel, it's very much obvious and clear they are very much in a position of aggression, very much in a position of offensive, and they are doing it, and they will continue in the whole year of 2024. And as far as the question of the elimination of Hamas is concerned, or the total elimination of the Palestinians is concerned, I think it's ridiculous, because they can't destroy Hamas, and even it will escalate the tension more and more in future. They can't destroy the Palestinians by force, by bombardment, by more aggression. That will create more tension in the future, and even it's not tolerable for international community to, if we see it in a wider context, that if it spills
Afridi,
over
now,
to
this
other
particular
states of
conflict,
the
although I see your pardon for the interjection over here, if this particular conflict continues for a longer time, even throughout the year 2024, but at a certain specific time, it will have to end someday. Whether it happens in year 2024, in the next one, or it might take a couple of more years for this to end. When this particular conflict ends on that specific day, where do you see the post-conflict governance, the role of various factions within the Gaza Strip?
I think, as I stated before, permanent solution is the two-state solution for this conflict. But if we talk about the temporary one, so I think the face of Israel, this is clear now, and it's very much simple. The whole international community that has observed it, and I think in future it will be difficult for Israel to have such kind of offensive because the Palestinians now they are more resilient and vigilant in this regard to defend them.
Right, Mr. Mahar, what's your understanding? How do you see, where do you see the post-conflict governance of the Gaza Strip in particular?
Actually, I think Israel is going to impose a permanent control on Gaza. Already it was besieged on all sides by Israel. After achieving their so-called objective of eliminating Hamas in Gaza, they are going to have some physical presence in Gaza to prevent any future conflict with the Hamas. And if America wants to play a role of sincere mediator in Middle East, they need to do two things. They need to control the influence of Jewish lobby, and they need to also curb the influence of the monster of military industrial complex in America that feeds off wars and conflicts in Middle East and across the world, because they benefit from the war. It boosts their arms sales and ammunitions in the region and across the world. So if America is sincere to salvage the so-called rule-based world order, it painstakingly built up after the Second World War, they need to end this war.
Right, Mr. Mahar, when you talk of the Israeli president post this particular conflict, after what they had set a target of eliminating a certain Palestinian group from that particular besieged strip. Now, do you think that's going to be suitable and that's going to get the endorsement from the US if it comes to the presence of Israeli authorities or their troops on the ground within Gaza?
No, because actually the problem with Israel is that they enjoy so much unconditional support from the US and the Western world that they look at the problem of Middle East through the barrel of their gun. They are not using their wisdom that this conflict, this war is creating the context, is creating the environment for the next war. If you are going to kill the Palestinians, if you are going to have a presence on them, you cannot, one day or another, this settler colonialism is going to end. But at what cost? So if Israel wants to coexist with the Palestinians, Israel needs to end this war rather than doing these sorts of things and having a presence, and are trying in vain to dismantle the underground subterranean tunnel network that you cannot achieve. These objectives are not realistic. You cannot kill all the Palestinians. You cannot brush this issue under the carpet. You need to come up with a solution sooner, the better for Israel, its security, and for the global peace and security.
So when we talk about the two-state solution, the seriousness of intention and the practical steps when it comes to the US authorities.
Now, this two-state solution on the paper it exists, but basically it lies buried under the rubble of Israeli bombing. Israel has dismantled the rule-based world order. Now, Israel has reminded us that we are not living in 21st century, but we are living in medieval times when there was no any regard or respect for the international laws or human rights and the sort of things. These violations and aggression of Israel is indicative of this behavior. They have taken us back to the medieval times.
Right, Mr. Saleem, your understanding of any future possible governance scenario after this particular conflict is ended?
Yeah. I think they've already started. There's a big debate in Israel going about it right as we speak, the day after. One model which has been discussed is that there was this limited self-rule. You know, they call it self-rule, but it was limited in many ways, as has been pointed out with Mr. Mahar as well. They were besieged, and there were many restrictions, and so it was a very limited autonomy. I think that so the day after would bring some sort of a governance which would be having even more limited autonomy. Number one. Number two, there's a possibility that there could be a multinational force, because that's one of the one of the ideas, that there could be a multinational force instead of Israeli forces there.
That force would be supervised by the United Nations? Or
yeah, you know, that could
that's going to be something different.
Yeah, yeah, because it's like a peacekeeping type of a thing. And if it's agreed, and then under the UN ambit, but we don't really know at this point, because these are certain different ideas, you know. Now the hard right Israelis, they don't want that. They want to see basically like, you know, Israel literally reoccupying Gaza and displacing the Palestinians. Now that is one extreme, and I don't see that happening, because already the US has opposed it quite clearly.
So what about the Palestinian representation afterwards? I mean, if that particular Palestinian group that Israel deemed of, you know, completely eliminating, what about the Palestinian representation?
Yeah.
Netanyahu hadn't been in the favor of PLO also.
Yeah,
I mean,
so far as PLA is concerned, we have to recall, number one, that, you know, there was a time before 2007 when both West Bank and Gaza was ruled by PLA, you know. But then Hamas was able to sort of, you know, like take over in Gaza. And it was not totally democratic the way it happened at the point. Now, there was one idea that let's bring back PLA, you know, in some way. So they basically, like, you know, handle the situation on the ground with a very limited autonomy. So these are also one of the ideas, you know, on the table. Then, you know, like the idea of the multinational force there. So we'll see, you know, like within Israel, because I think eventually it has to be decided within Israel, although there would be some US influence on that, some sort of, you know, like international influence, so to speak. But eventually Israelis are going to decide that.
Your point is well taken. One last quick comment as to what should be the responsibility at this point in time of International Criminal Court, which has been, of course, criticized by a couple of UN special envoys for being too slow in prosecuting those responsible for committing crimes against humanity that are, of course, being perpetrated by Israel in Gaza. Who is going to hold them accountable? They have suggested the national courts with jurisdiction over war crimes and genocide must be activated, as the ICC is proving too slow and ineffective on the situation in Palestine.
Yeah, I think I've said my previous comments on this matter as well. We have seen in certain instances, like Milosevic, for instance, from Serbia, you know, the Bosnian Serbs, and there were others as well. You know, like some Bosnian Serbs leader who had been tried, and then there have been other instances. But in this particular instance, I don't really see. But you know, some people have approached the ICJ. ICJ is a part of the UN system, by the way. But like UNSC has not been able to play any effective role in that. Any other UN organs, even the UN humanitarian organizations, are facing a very dire situation in terms of their being effective there. So I don't really see a situation where anything serious happens there.
Right. Mr. Mahar, any responsibility of the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court when it comes to holding the perpetrators of war crimes there?
Actually, I think it's wishful thinking, very idealistic argument that how without the support of America and its European allies, who is going to put Israel behind the bar? They are supporting the state of Israel. They are the bakers of Israel.
So what does this mean? The national courts with jurisdiction over war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide must be activated. What does that mean?
Who holds influence over the International Criminal Court? You think they are going to put the state of Israel in the dock? No, they are supporting the state of Israel, so they are not going to push for the trial of war crimes.
Right, Mr. Munawar Ali Mahar, expert international relations. Thank you very much for joining in the studio tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us. And on the phone line, we were joined by Dr. Manzoor Afridi, Foreign Affairs expert. Dr. Afridi, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take care of yourselves.